we're live.
Great. Wonderful.
Welcome, everyone. Okay, so today we are talking about our topic, Beyond Therapy, Modern Techniques for Wellbeing. Welcome, everyone, as you join us. We will slowly get started, and please remember to leave comments as we go. We love the engagement. And yeah, let's have a good time. So today we have with us Dr. Phillipa Haine. Phillipa is a counseling psychologist and postdoctoral fellow at Stellenbosch University. She has a BSc in genetics, an honors in psychology, cum laude from Stellenbosch University, an MA in counseling psychology, and a PhD in psychology from Rhodes University. Her research interests include enhancing mental health care accessibility and quality in South Africa. Phillipa is also a contract lecturer, teaches and supervises research at undergraduate and postgraduate levels, and also has a private practice working from a cognitive behavioral therapy approach, which is perfect because that's what we're talking about today. And Phillipa is also a vice chair of the South African Association for Counseling Psychology. So Phillipa is Smarty Pants, who's done a lot of cool things. Thanks for being here today, Phillipa.
Daniel, thank you for having me. What an honor. And for those viewers, we go way back to grassroots. So it's special to be here with you today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you here. All right, so what is the topic we are discussing today? So we'll briefly go over what Psyche Innovations is and does. Then we'll jump straight into what is Third Wave CBT. Then we'll talk about sort of beyond the cognitive focus of CBT. Then mindfulness as a bridge to the present, embracing psychological flexibility, and then sort of wrapping it up as how this kind of works as a holistic approach to well-being. Right, so for those of you who don't know yet what Psyche Innovations is and does, we're the company behind Psyche Mental Health, an app that's designed for self-development. It's all about improving your mental health and well-being, learning psychological skills that are beneficial for self-care and mental health promotion. It's also all about building self-knowledge, resilience, and stress tolerance. So who can use it? It's designed for teenagers and adults. It's available on the app stores. I encourage you to go check it out. The user journey is really about helping people identify the domains of their well-being, part of what we're talking about today, seeing where there's space for improvement or what's going well and building on those strengths, learning skills, tracking progress, and setting goals to further that personal development. Right, so I encourage you to go check it out. Today's topic, Beyond Traditional Therapy, Third Wave CBT. Let's jump right in. So Phillipa, what is Third Wave CBT? Educate us.
Great, thanks, Daniel. So I think before I get into sort of the explanation of what Third Wave CBT is, I thought I would ask you and the viewers to think of a sunset, or if you're a morning person, to think of a sunrise, and just imagine yourself in that moment. What would you see? Maybe the different colors, so the pinks and oranges, the purples. What would you hear? Maybe you're at the beach, some early seagulls, up early, or if you're in the mountains, I don't know, some scurrying squirrels or something. What would you smell? The ocean breeze. What would you feel? The sand beneath your feet. So engaging your senses in that moment. And I think most of us can agree, and Daniel, you can tell me how you feel, but we all appreciate sunsets or sunrises for what they are. We are fully present, we are aware, and we kind of just take it in. And really that is what Third Wave CBT is about, being present without judgment, and accepting things as they are. We don't try and change sunsets or sunrises. So, in a nutshell.
I love that. I find sunsets is such a meaningful and easy way to kind of bring oneself to the present. I came across a statistic, which I cannot remember the number of, but it's not important, of how many sunsets we actually see in our life. And it's startlingly few. And it made me realize that, all these moments, big and small, we can take for granted. And with that in mind, whenever I do watch the sunset, it's like double for me. Like I'm like, oh, there's so few, and this is an opportunity to be present. I'm really pulled in. It's super special. I kind of all the worries and other thoughts kind of filter out a little bit.
Yes, that's it. And I think that's the trick where it's easy to be mindful and present and aware and accepting in a moment like that with a sunrise or sunset. But when we have difficult emotions like anxiety or sadness or grief, it's very difficult to be mindful and accepting. And that's where it takes practice and time, and it's available to all of us at any point. It's an ancient practice that's been around for thousands of years. But I think we live in, and perhaps speaking to what you were saying, a modern society where we're so fast paced and we don't slow down to appreciate things in the present moment. And so that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think we're all guilty of that. I was feeling a bit stressed and anxious earlier with all the things that are going on in work and life. And I went outside and looked at the view and took a few deep breaths earlier when you were like, it's about breathing. I took a deep breath. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to help. But it can be tricky. I think it can be tricky for a lot of people, especially if we haven't been actively trying to build mindfulness into our days. In the beginning, it can feel like, whoa, how do I start this?
Yes, right. So just perhaps speaking about where it came from is that, as we understand, it's third wave CBT. And for those viewers who don't know what CBT stands for, it stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. And cognitive behavioral therapy, what it suggests, deals with cognition, so what we think, behavior, what we do, and then our feelings and our emotions, and each impacts the other. And how it started off with, so for example, with behavior, someone who's quite anxious, that was the first wave. They might, if they were in therapy, focus on relaxation skills. So learning how to do breathing exercises to reduce the anxiety. But then we realized that, and that was the second wave, that thoughts matter. What we think influences how we feel and what we do. And so cognitive behavioral therapy in its traditional form is about challenging irrational thoughts. So, for example, someone who's quite anxious at work, and maybe their thought is, if I don't do this work, I'm going to get fired. So the intervention would be, okay, that's not necessarily realistic. So let's challenge or reframe that thought. Is it maybe catastrophic thinking? And then bringing in the relaxation techniques. Third wave CBT is about some thoughts are actually quite rational. And so rather than challenging them, accepting them, sitting with them, being curious about them, and sitting with the emotions. So being stressed at work, we can't really change that. So there's some instances where things, they won't change. So rather than putting that on someone where to force cognitive change, to encourage acceptance and mindfulness. So that's where it comes from.
That's awesome. So it's really bringing in the thoughts, the behaviors, and some sort of like mindfulness acceptance of reality and how things are into a more holistic model so that we can
Yes.
develop and grow through what we go through, I guess, without sounding too cheesy.
Exactly that. And another aspect of third wave CBT is that it's value based. So value driven. And what that means is that we help our clients to identify their most important things in their lives. And if you Google values, there are hundreds. It could be anything from friends and family to ambition to learning to love. And what are the most important things to you, and how do we realign your behaviors to those values that will bring kind of inner peace and yeah.
Yeah, it sounds so like logical when you hear it, but it can often feel difficult to kind of figure out these things as we navigate through life. I mean, like people, I think on some level understand like, oh, my thoughts and behaviors are linked together, and that by aligning them with my values, that it will like kind of make more sense. But a lot of us struggle with that, A lot of us struggle to be present or to figure out what our values really are. And hopefully, as we talk about this topic a little bit more, it'll kind of start to make a little bit more sense, and we'll give people a little, or you will give people some tools and tips that they can use to kind of start that process. So I thought maybe now is a good time to explain that sensory hand experience or exercise. Sorry.
Yes, yes. So and this is again an exercise for viewers. So you could perhaps just have a look at your hand, and I want you to take a moment to notice the lines in your hand, the shapes, the gaps between your fingers, the colors, the textures. So maybe you notice the spirals in your fingerprints, and you can close your hand and crunch it kind of into a gentle fist. Notice how the colors change. Flip your hand over. Notice if there's any scars or sunspots. So being curious about your hand. And how many of us take the time to actually slow down and look at our palm, our hand that we have access to all the time, and to notice the sensations, the colors, the feeling, where in that moment you might notice that the thoughts kind of drift to the background. I don't know what your experience was, Daniel. I don't know if you were able to have a look at your hand.
I love it. It's kind of like the sunset one for me works really well, but I can't take the sunset with me wherever I go. Whereas for me at least, I can take my hands everywhere. And I was just thinking about I'm sitting at a wooden table, and I find that when I look at the grooves in like wood, it kind of like helps me relax and be present and be mindful. But again, can't take a wooden table everywhere I go. But I felt that similar kind of feeling when I did the hand exercise with you now, and obviously earlier when we kind of figuring out what we were going to say today. Um, so it is really powerful. And I think these cool little tips and tools that we can use when we're stressed or anxious or feeling all overwhelmed, as you said as well, it's like putting things in your toolbox that you can use in the right setting. So I
Yes.
think it's really cool and really helpful. But it also made me realize I do need to moisturize my hands a little bit more. How do you find it? Is this exercise, or is there another one that you find particularly valuable?
This one's a great one that I think. So there's one that you might have come across called the five senses exercise. That's really something that you can do anywhere at any point, where you might even, for the viewers right now, be just sitting in your room and acknowledging things that you can see, a table, your laptop, And what can you hear? So maybe there's cars driving past, there's birds in the trees, the buzz of the laptop again. What can you smell? Maybe there's a bit of a musty smell. You need to open the windows. Maybe the fresh airs, the cool airs, kind of coming through the window. How does your chair feel? Or maybe you're lying on your bed. Is the mattress comfortable? Is it soft? Is it firm underneath your spine? And the last one would be taste. So have you just made yourself a cup of tea while you're watching this? Or what can you taste something sweet? Maybe you have sparkle, or I don't know. You've had a mint, or so that could be accessible at any point, and I really like that one. What do you think about that one, Daniel?
I also really like, we're getting some thumbs up and some likes, which is really cool. I also really enjoy the five senses, sort of like imagery or mindfulness practice. And something I've done with people before is helping them write their own imagery or five senses script. So, because some senses for some people are really powerful. As an example, swimmers, people who like really swim a lot and train, like the smell of chlorine, like instantly transports them to the pool. It puts them in that like, oh, I'm about to perform kind of mindset. Or some people find the sound of rain on a tin roof really relaxing, or the crackle of a fire. I've got a fire going. It's getting a bit nippy. So there's things like that, and I'm going to sort of stand out as a bit of a geek here, but like I really like Lord of the Rings, and I have this like happy place where I imagine I'm a hobbit in the Shire with all these rolling green hills, and getting red just saying that, but it's true, and I use that to kind of, when I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed or anxious or stressed or struggling with some strong emotions, which we'll kind of talk more about now. I find that's really helpful to just think about these things or imagine myself in a place where I was relaxed before. So sometimes that's even imagining a friend or talking to a friend or something like that. It can sound silly when you say it out loud, but it really does help. I don't know how you find it and what you think about.
Absolutely, and I think so. They've shown often the brain can't tell the difference between what is reality and what you're thinking about, and so if you can take yourself almost on a mental holiday, a mental vacation, and that safe space imagery of maybe it's the hobbits and the hobbit land, or it's the beach, or it's in your bed. It could be a safe space that automatically engages your parasympathetic nervous system. So that would be your calming system, part of your body, rather than the sympathetic, which is your fight or flight, or you're in danger. So I think it's a fantastic tool to have in the toolbox.
Completely agree. I think let's move on to you explaining beyond the cognitive focus. What does this mean?
Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, the third wave CBT is beyond changing cognition, so beyond challenging or reframing our thoughts. It's about accepting and welcoming, even celebrating different emotions, different thoughts, sitting with them. And it probably introduces this poem quite nicely that you're going to be reading, Daniel. But treating your emotions, your thoughts, like guests visiting a guest house. So you are the guest house, your thoughts, your emotions are the guest. They will come and go, welcome them, treat them all the same. So perhaps to hand over to you at that point.
Yeah, I see we have a comment here before I read the poem saying the concept of a mental holiday really appeals to me. It appeals to me too, right? Like we all need a bit of a break from reality sometimes, and finding peace. So let's use that as a segue into this poem. So full credit to Phillipa for finding it. I thought I'd just read it. So it's called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearly you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door, laughing, and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Powerful.
Thanks, Daniel. And this poem is by Rumi, for anyone who's interested in looking it up. And I just feel it really speaks to the third wave CBT. And it also, you might have noticed at the end there, it speaks to kind of a spirituality as well, where whatever you may believe in, bringing in that as well and accepting your emotions as a guide from beyond. So I think in that sense, it's bringing in that holistic approach.
Yeah. What I really like about it is, again, not to be repetitive, but the non-judgmental aspect of treating all your emotions and your experiences like equally, whether it's joy or sadness or whatever. And I think a lot of us have been taught to like try and turn up and amp up the positive emotions and turn down or suppress or get rid of the negative ones, the sadness, the sorrow, the shame, the jealousy, the ones that we really don't want to speak about or think about. And by not acknowledging them, this like unwanted guest seems to stick around longer, and often feels bigger in the room, in the house. At least from my experience, it can feel that way. So I think this is maybe a good time to ask the audience one of our questions that we'll also be answering ourselves is, and I'd love your comments, how do you usually handle strong emotions? So Phillipa, how do you handle your strong emotions?
Well, it's taken a lot of practice, and it's still practicing it, but trying to sit with those emotions, acknowledging them. And I love the term being a naive observer, so being curious. Where is this coming from? What does this look like? What color is this? What feeling could I draw this? And just sitting with it. And the more I sit with it, the more I accept it, the sooner the strong emotion will lift. So that's kind of how I approach. I'd love to hear how others manage theirs.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. I had a kind of enlightening experience many years ago. A friend of mine, Brendan, we were out dancing and having a good time, and this troublemaker basically came along and was acting silly and aggravating us. And he was very calm and cool and collected, and I found myself getting more and more frustrated with the situation and like the emotion, like I didn't really know what to do with it. And I kind of realized that I was becoming more and more a victim of the situation and my own emotions by kind of like overreacting to it, and rather just being like, why is this giving me this emotional reaction so much? And why am I giving so much power to it? Like, rather be curious to it and, let it go. And there's another motivational speaker, again, name not important, but she talks about jealousy. And she was like, when like people don't want it, shame and jealousy are emotions people don't ever want to admit to. It's like, sweep it under the carpet. And she said, like, these emotions are such strong signals for us. Like, being jealous about something clearly is highlighting something that you feel is maybe missing or something that you want, or like pay attention to it in a non-judgmental kind of like curious way, because it will illuminate so much about what it is you want or feel you need, or why you're feeling stuck. I don't know if you agree with what I'm saying, or you have sort of like a counter argument, or
Absolutely, absolutely. And while you were speaking, what was coming to mind was that, and I'm sure you might be familiar with it, that emotion wheel. And there's hundreds of different emotions, and then they kind of diversify and diversify. So if anyone's interested, you can Google it. And there's a broad spectrum of emotions we feel as we are human. And as you mentioned earlier, Daniel, we often get this feedback from society where positive vibes only, positivity is only accepted here, kind of be positive. And yes, positivity is needed because that also brings hope, but we need a balanced perspective where it's okay to hold both and accept the negative as well as the positive, and all the other emotions in between.
yeah. So just tell our audience again what it is, that resource that they could go look at.
It's the emotions wheel. And if they just type into Google emotion wheel, it should come up.
Awesome. So we have a comment here. Might be a bit long to put on the screen, but I'll give it a go. Kelsey says, with strong emotions, I like to try take some time to myself to dig deeper and try understand why I reacted / am feeling this way. I often have to remind myself to think about how or why the other people reacted or are acting. I think it's important to remember that everyone is in a different place in their life journey to you, and it's necessary to give yourself and others grace to experience and express how they are feeling. Sure, so true. And I think that just adds another layer to it, like identifying why we're feeling something in a certain way might be completely separate to why somebody else is, what they're thinking and how they're behaving and how they're feeling. Um,
Yes.
and sometimes the intention or the situation might, like, it's completely different. I watched a guy who was talking about like walking his dog down a footpath, and somebody was like ringing the bell behind him on a bicycle to pass, and he was getting like anxious because he was trying to like move his dog out of the path so the cyclist could come by. And the lady like slowed down and she was like, oh, thank you, I hope you're having a lovely walk, like have a great time. And he was like, I was getting all anxious and worked up thinking that this person's like impatient and frustrated, but she wasn't. And I think we often, like, when we struggle to manage our own emotions and how we feel, we can project that onto other people and assume that they're feeling and thinking a certain way, which is often untrue.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And there's a lovely analogy that's actually coming to mind with that, where if you think about a storm and you're in the middle of a storm and there's rain and wind and leaves and it's chaotic, and you can imagine those as sort of emotions or specifically upsetting emotions. But then if you had to zoom out and you were looking at the storm from space, it actually looks quite peaceful. It's very quiet in space and you can observe it. And so this is really the aim again, to take a step back and observe what is going on. And it's not to say it's not justified, because your reaction or your experience or your feeling, we're not saying you should change it, but just to observe it, and what's going on. And that disconnect, rather than feeling like you're in the middle of the storm, you can have a kind of more objective perspective on what's going on rather than subjective. I think that's maybe the way of explaining it. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I find it so much easier to do it after the fact and a lot more difficult to do it while it's happening. Like it's easy
Yes.
to, well, it's easier for me afterwards to be like, oh, this is why I got angry. That's how I felt that way. This is how I would have liked to have responded. But like when I'm really angry or frustrated, it can be hard to be like, like step back a little bit, like maybe you're overreacting, or like, why are you feeling this way? Maybe you need to step away. Or, yeah, it can be tough.
Yes.
I see we have a comment here from Leonie with regard to our question, saying meditation, practicing self-compassion, and also emotional alchemy works for me. Wow, I don't know what emotional alchemy is. It sounds very fancy, and I need to look into that. Thanks for sharing, Leonie. For the sake of time, I think we should move on.
Wonderful.
So our next slide is mindfulness, a bridge to the present. What is this about?
Right. So, as we've mentioned already, a large part of third wave CBT is mindfulness. And there is such a thing, and we touched on this the other day, Daniel, where mindfulness in itself is quite different from mindfulness meditation, where we think, meditation, choosing a moment to sit and be aware and present. But mindfulness in itself is accessible to us all the time, where no matter what we're doing, we could be eating mindfully, looking at the textures, tasting what does the texture feel like in our mouth. Is it crunchy? Is it sloshy? What does it smell like? Mindful walking. So we spoke about in modern society, we're often rushing here, there, everywhere, to the next thing, next appointment, next meeting. How often do we notice how our feet feel in our shoes, slowing down to feel our heel to toe movement, that rhythm that we usually have when we walk. So mindfulness, again, is accessible to us anytime. Noticing our breathing. How does our chest rise and fall, as opposed to kind of, letting our anxious thoughts run wild and living in our heads all the time. Engaging our senses, noticing, being aware.
I think for me, I struggle to kind of just like automatically be mindful. Maybe it's just because I have too much of like a monkey mind going on. There's always like a million things buzzing up there. Maybe it's my ADHD. I don't know. So I kind of like, because this is my experience, I kind of like build in things into my day that really help me to be more mindful. So like you said, going for a walk, especially if like it's really a lot going on up here, going for a walk, looking at the bugs or the termites on the path. I have a weird thing for looking at ants. It really helps. It makes me kind of like appreciate the present moment and like really live, because I think maybe a lot of people will share this experience, but you go hang out with your friends and you're worried about work, and then you're at work and you're thinking about your friends, or you're on holiday and you're planning your next holiday rather than enjoying the holiday. And I think we can all get caught up in too busy thinking about, worrying about, and other things than living in the present. I don't know what you feel, what you think about that, and it kind of leads to the question is like, when do you find yourself being mindful?
Yeah. And Daniel, you make a really good point, and perhaps while we're waiting for some responses, I can just chip in there where mindfulness is a practice. So we need to practice being mindful. And just like maybe thinking about when we quite unfit and we haven't been to the gym for a long time, getting back into exercise can be really difficult, and we have to be quite strict with ourselves and find moments in our day to be active. But the more we exercise, the easier it becomes, and then it becomes part of your routine and then your lifestyle. And so similar with mindfulness and being mindful, the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But it does take practice. And perhaps answering a little bit to the audience as well, perhaps being mindful is easier when we experience happier emotions, easier emotions, than the upsetting ones.
For sure. I keep going back to this kind of quote that it's like the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. And what that means to me is mindfulness or exercise or any habit, whether it's working on self-confidence or your relationships or whatever, in the beginning it feels like I'm just doing this thing once. Like, what kind of difference is it going to make? Or like, it's so long away that by making this small change now, will it make a difference? And it really does, because those small things eventually become part of who you are. And, start now, and by the time you're 95 or whatever, you've been practicing mindfulness and reaping the benefits of it your whole life. And I try to remind myself that when I'm starting a new habit or a new practice, and especially when I flounder and fall out of it, and I'm like, oh, damn, I said I was going to do this thing, and I started, and then I haven't done it for a few months, and now I'm getting back into it. And then I kind of go back to the building blocks of like, okay, well, where do I find myself being mindful and building on that? And sometimes they're simple, self-indulgent things like having a bath and lighting a candle, or going for a quick walk, or doing some journaling. This thing goes everywhere with me. But it's small little things like that seem to help. What do you do that really helps you be mindful? Since you're
Yes.
the expert, yeah.
Good question. And I think when I first was learning and engaging with mindfulness, what really helped me was, and this sounds really strange, but stop streets. When in Grahamstown at the time, that's where I learned it. Literally, the stop sign. Stop. Take a breath. Take a moment. Look around. Not you should be doing that anyway because that's safe. But just as a psychological, double bonus of slow down, stop, notice your environment, what's going on in my body, am I tense, am I relaxed? And then another one was also in the mornings when I would open my windows, trying to be mindful about kind of the cool air, was it hot outside? How do I feel about the day? So yeah, those are my two that I try and still practice.
That's awesome. I think it's so cool how we all have different things. And the stop sign also kind of like, for me, made me think of negative thought stoppage and having that like mental stop sign that you use. And you were actually using a physical one, which is super cool. I see we have a comment here from Kelsey saying, I think I'm most mindful when going for a run. I find it much easier to clear my thoughts of the usual clutter and really focus on a few important things relevant to the moments and the scenery I'm experiencing. The other time I find myself being mindful is when I'm doing the dishes at the sink.
I love that.
Very cool. I love that we all have these different experiences. Me, when I'm running, I'm just trying to get air in. But when I slow down and I have an excuse like, I've got to walk now, then I find it a bit easier to be mindful. And probably don't experience the mindfulness of doing the dishes that often because I don't do them as much as I should. But love it. We have on the slide here a few other helpful exercises that people can do. Obviously, we don't have time to go into these super in depth, but hopefully you can tell us a little bit more about them, Phillipa, and people can look into them, whether it's on our app or using the good old Google.
Yes, so absolutely. And Daniel, I think we've covered a few of them. So kind of mindful eating, mindful walking, the five senses we spoke about. So the body scan is something, again, just you could be lying down in your bed at night. or at your work desk, and starting off from your toes and just noticing the sensations, how your feet feel, moving to your legs, and how your legs feel on, against the chair, moving to your kind of your upper body, and are you hunched over? Are you feeling any tension anywhere? And so really just going through your body, scanning your body. What are you noticing? Is there any pain? Is there a warmness, a coolness? So that's also a great one. Box breathing is the last one I'll touch on, and that is really just finding a square or a box anywhere. So it could be your screen of your phone or your laptop, or a tile on the wall, or something that's a square rectangular shape, and really just noticing your breathing. So breathing up the side, in, breathing out, along, breathing down the side, and breathing out. So literally in that square. And boxes, squares, rectangles are almost everywhere in our environment. So that's also another great one to use.
That's awesome. And it's nice having, like, knowing a few of these, because I find that in some situations one works really well for me, and in others it doesn't, So like I kind of pick and choose the tool in the toolbox that's relevant to the situation. So the more you know, the better, I guess. We have a comment here from Leonie saying that she agrees with you, Phillipa, and that it requires deliberate daily practice. Completely agree. I just wish I could. I think all people, I mean, maybe I'm just not good at this, but doing it every day, I'm guilty of not always being perfect at that. And I think a lot of people could probably relate to that, but we should always move towards doing better, being better. Oh, we have a comment here from Cameron. Just did the box breathing method as I'm listening to this. Thank you, Cameron. Yes, box breathing is great. I love it. So sometimes I keep trying to do like higher numbers, and then I get upset that I'm taking too long or going too quick on some sides of the box. But box breathing is awesome.
Yeah, and that's why we don't have to complicate it. It's simple, but keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Yes. Embracing psychological flexibility. What's this about, Philip?
Right. So this is again just speaking to the idea of being able to step back and observe our emotions and our thoughts. And this is a really great exercise that I often get my clients to do, where you imagine your thoughts as cars. So it's a metacognition exercise, so thinking about your thinking. And you imagine each different car is a different color, so representing a different thought. So a yellow car could be a happy thought, blue car, sad thought. And each and every day we have thousands of thoughts that enter our head constantly. And we cannot, as humans, control the thoughts we experience. That's just simply impossible. If I say to you right now, whatever you do, don't think of a green rabbit sitting on my head. What you're going to do, you're going to think of a green rabbit sitting on my head. So the idea is to embrace again and observe our thoughts as cars traveling on a highway. So imagine yourself sitting on a hill, watching those thoughts go by, those cars, and acknowledging, oh, there's a blue car, there's a yellow car. Oh, I actually really like red cars. I'm going to get into that thought and let that thought go and kind of travel along with it. And you might find another few different green and red and blue and kind of intrude. But again, just taking a step back, looking from the hill, okay, observing, okay, I'll choose a red car again.
I really like that. When you first explained it to me, it made me think of the leaves on the stream sort of exercise, where you take a thought that's stuck in your head and you put it on a leaf and you let it like flow down the stream and you say kind of like goodbye to it, which is super helpful and valuable. But when you started explaining this metacognition exercise of the cars. I really connected with it because my brain often feels like this highway of cars is going all over the place, and like labeling the different emotions as colors. Like that's super cool because like it'll come, it'll go. I can kind of connect with one and watch it and think about it and not feel so overwhelmed that like, oh, there's another one coming and another one coming, which with the
Yes.
leaves of the stream exercise, which again is great. I sometimes felt like, damn, that leaf is coming back up the stream at me. I can see it again. But this is a cool way to think about it.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah. So I've actually heard the leaf exercise as like a log, where you watch the logs going past on the river instead of kind of climbing onto the log and going with it. We don't have to. We can just acknowledge it going past. Yeah. So I love that analogy.
I love this comment here. The thought labeling reminds me of Inside Out. 100% joy and sadness. That movie is the best. Whenever I'm feeling a little sad, I'm like, oh, it's sadness. It's come again.
Have you seen? There's a second one out now. Inside Out 2.
I know, I'm excited. I watch too many like children animated movies. This is being recorded. But yeah, those
I haven't
movies are
had the
great.
chance to see it.
They have such great like meaning to them. And I think in life, like these great films or books or other media we consume can help us understand these kind of like complex emotions and feelings and thoughts that we have in a really helpful way. And if people connect with that, that's awesome.
Yes, yes. And again, kind of encouraging from childhood really that all emotions are acceptable and welcome, and yeah, speaking to Third Wave CBT.
Exactly. So tell us about the compass analogy.
Right. So perhaps something I didn't mention right at the beginning is that Third Wave CBT comprises a number of different therapies. So you might have heard of acceptance and commitment therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and then there's the fourth one is mindfulness stress reduction therapy. And all of these have slightly different focuses, but in essence, they are all third wave CBTs. So this one specifically comes from ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. And the idea is that we each inherently should have kind of 3 to 5 values, things that are really important to us, and we should use them as a compass to move in the direction that we wanting to evolve or grow. So, for example, a bit of self-disclosure. So mine would be learning and achieving kind of personal growth. The second would be kind of compassion and giving back. And then the third being having some sort of balance. And so I need to ask myself each day, am I doing things in my life that are aligning with my core values, what I value most? And if not, how can I redirect myself and move in the direction that aligns with the things that are most important for me? So someone else, it might be friends and family. So if you're finding that's your value, but you aren't spending a lot of time with friends and family, how can you bring that value more into your everyday life, spending more time with friends and family, reaching out to them? So that's another great one you can have a look at. Daniel, what are your values, would you say? Top 3.
Yeah, you asked me this when we were practicing, sort of figuring out what we wanted to say, and it kind of connects with the activity we also do in the app, which is another self-reflection activity called the Big Rocks, and it's all about like figuring out like what are the big, most important things in your life, and then what are the smaller things, and those big important things, whether that's family or work or spirituality or whatever it is, are often sort of like closely tied to our values. And part of that activity, similarly to this compass analogy, is about moving towards those things that we identify as being important, our values. And I guess there's like a huge discomfort when you realize, if you do the work of figuring out what those values are, and that you're not moving towards them, that you have to sort of change.
Yes.
And I think the thing that, like, I try to set goals and move towards them with that kind of intentionality, but I need to do more of the hard work figuring out like the value underneath the thing that's important. Like, because family is important, but what's the value connected with it? And I sometimes feel that anxiety and stress and a lot of the other negative emotions arise from not living your kind of like authentic truth, or living in accordance with your values. You know, like if your value is to be kind and generous, but you're not feeling like you're acting that out in your life, like that's going to make you feel kind of yuck. And
Absolutely.
I kind of, I know we should do it proactively, but I really catch myself noticing that maybe my actions and thoughts and whatever aren't in alignment with my values when I'm starting to feel all these negative emotions. And it's kind of like a warning symbol, or a tank's running empty in the car kind of thing. Like, oh, damn, maybe I need
Yes.
to do some work here to kind of figure it out. Which I guess kind of connects with one of the questions that we wanted to ask and discuss a little bit, was around like, how do you handle when you get caught up in negative thoughts? And I've been rambling a bit, so I'm curious what you do, Phillipa.
I think the first thing is, again, to take a step back, to notice that you're getting caught up in your negative thoughts. The negative thoughts, again, may be justified, so accepting them for what they are and sitting with that for a while, and then maybe doing one of the exercises, doing something that aligns with your values. So maybe nature's one of your core values. Are you getting caught up in negative thoughts, where you're not spending enough time in nature? And then if you can go and take yourself outside in the sunshine, sit on the grass, feel more grounded, notice the birds. So yeah, I wonder if there's any outside comments on that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We'll see if anyone has anything to say. But
Okay.
like you, I try to be deliberate when negative thoughts come up, and feelings, and then like put deliberate effort into doing mindfulness practices or the things that align with my values, and go spending time with family and friends, or pursuing a hobby that I really enjoy that kind of fills the different buckets of my well-being. And this is maybe a really tough question to ask, but what are your thoughts or suggestions when we feel like we're really stuck? Like I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm worried, and I go for my walk in nature, which is something that typically helps, but it's not helping this time. What would you suggest, or what are your thoughts then?
Well, I think the first thing I'd kind of red flags sticking out for me is that if it's something that usually makes you happy and that you usually value and you usually get some sort of joy out of it, and you're not anymore, it could be a sign of something deeper and more serious, for example, depression. So in that instance, reaching out for professional help would be probably my first suggestion, where this you can be as mindful as you want, but this only takes you so far, if there's an underlying deeper challenge. Yeah.
For sure. And I think there's also, given the South African context and other developing countries, there's a truth that would be remiss not to mention is that some people are in circumstances that are in environments that are really oppressive and not great, and that sometimes it's normal to feel down and feel stressed when you're living in an environment that's like constantly breaking you down and you don't have opportunities to find peace or to practice mindfulness. And that, we're not saying that if you can't find these things, something's wrong with you. Sometimes it is just the environment, and I think it is important to acknowledge and to say that. We have a comment here from Kelsey, number one fan. I try to reach out to friends. It's easier to navigate your way through a negative or difficult thoughts when you can talk them through with someone and more easily see which are exaggerated and which may be relevant. So true. Friends can be a great sounding board to kind of, as I've said before, get the farts out of your head, because sometimes you get stuck in this like negative cyclical thinking, and sometimes you say it out loud and you're like, wow, that does sound a bit absurd, and your friend can validate that sometimes and be like, hey, it's normal to feel this way, or hey, but that is a little weird, let's talk about it.
True. Absolutely.
All right, let's move on. We're running out of time here. So sort of a quick wrap up around what we've been talking about and the holistic approach to well-being is obviously CBT and Third Wave CBT is like a really big, meaty topic. I just want to acknowledge that. And there's so much depth to it that we're scratching a little bit of the surface here. But hopefully we get some cool tips that people can try out and look into. But really, all kind of approaches that we're trying to teach through these webinars and the skills that we teach on the app, and obviously what clinicians do is moving people towards holistic well-being, and that's really about managing your emotions, and part of that is that connecting to that poem and accepting, being that naive observer, I think was the cool term you used there, Phillipa. Sort of identifying them and managing them appropriately, and connected with that is that self-awareness. How am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? Which can also be useful for finding, being task-oriented and doing things purposely that can help you manage the emotions or thoughts that you're experiencing. Then there's the acceptance part, that non-judgmental acceptance. Something I sometimes struggle with. I think a lot of people can struggle with, I don't want to be angry. Like, I'm silly for being angry. But sometimes it's rational to be angry. Like I'm a human being. And accepting that can be really helpful and healthy. Then building our resilience. Through practicing all of these things, we become more able to deal with negative experiences and negative emotions when they arise, and also to enjoy the positive emotions and positive experiences when they come around. That's one of the core things in mindfulness, at least as I understand it, is like really enjoying the present. What's that thing about like, I don't want to butcher it now. Yesterday is history, and I'm going to ruin it. Tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. And I try to, I'm so sorry I butchered that. But I try to keep that in mind, in that like you really enjoy and suck the marrow out of life when you're living in the now and not too future oriented and future focused or worrying about the past too much. We talked briefly about aligning with goals and goals with values and what's important, and then we use that compass metaphor or analogy, which is great. And then the mind-body connection. We talk a lot about that in these webinars, in how closely linked they are. Like they're opposite sides. Well, maybe opposite sides of the same coin is maybe even too far. They're really kind of deeply intertwined. And I think we tend to forget that. So what did we talk about in our webinar today? We talked very briefly about what Psyche Innovations is and does. We went very sort of surface level into what Third Wave CBT is. I encourage you to look into it some more, do some more Googling. We then talked about sort of beyond the cognitive focus. We looked at some cool exercises there. We then discussed mindfulness as a bridge to the present, how we can embrace psychological flexibility, and then how this sort of like all comes together as a sort of holistic approach. So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. I hope you got some value from it. And of course, thank you to Dr. Phillipa Haine for joining us today. She is doing really cool stuff. Please reach out to her if you have any questions in a sort of like personal or professional capacity. So yeah, thank you very much for being here with us, Phillipa. Hope to have you back again sometime.
I'd love that. Thanks, Daniel. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Cheers, everyone. Bye.
Bye.